good to see y'all tonight. We're real happy everybody came out, and we hope that you're getting a lot out of these displays. We think that they're excellent displays. They're something that you can visualize along with listening to us sort of rattle off at the mouth a little bit. But what we want to talk about here at this particular stop tonight is targeted breeding. Okay? How do we produce the type of cattle that we need to produce to fit our industry and to fit the window of consumer acceptability? And we're going to break that down into two parts. One, we're going to talk about what we're targeting in the live animal, and then we're going to talk about what we're targeting in the carcass. Okay? But first, let's look at some statistics in the industry and see what we actually have. If we talk about consumer acceptability, what we find is that when consumers are eating steaks out of cattle that grade USDA Select, they have about a 25% undesirable or unfavorable eating experience. Okay? 1 out of every 4. All right? Now, would any other industry accept a failure rate of 1 out of 4 or 25%? No, sir. And we can't afford that. All right? So we've got to do a little bit better job, and that's what we're talking about tonight. But if we narrow that down and we talk about consumer acceptability for animals that grade USDA Choice or higher, then we lower that to only a 10% undesirable eating experience. And if we look at animals that grade USDA Prime, guess where it goes to? 0. Okay? 0% undesirable eating experience. In other words, animals that grade USDA Prime, everybody likes the steaks. Okay? And so we need to target a window of acceptability that will allow us to increase beef demand for our product. All right. Now let's look first of all at this marketing window of acceptability for live cattle. What do we want to target? And we're talking about fed cattle here, okay? Cattle coming out of the feed yard prior to slaughter or harvest. We'd like to see a live weight in our fed cattle between 1,000 and 1,350 pounds, a maximum back fat thickness over the 12th and 13th rib of no more than 0.45 of an inch, and a USDA muscling score of 1 or 2. Now let's look at two factors that primarily make up this window of acceptability up here. The first is the weight and skeletal size of our cattle. In other words, what's the frame score on them and the rate of maturity on these cattle. If we look at this, the bottom end of our cattle here, these are small frame cattle that tend to be early maturing. And when we look at these types of calves, what we find is that as fed cattle, they mature out too quickly. And when you look at the percent fat bone to lean on these cattle, we typically tend to have a much higher percentage fat than we want. And I'm talking about fat in the form of back fat or subcutaneous fat and kidney, pelvic, and heart fat, the waste fat that we have to cut out and throw away. Okay? If we look at these animals that are medium framed, they tend to have a little bit more desirable proportion when they're finished out of fat to bone to lean. And these are the animals that will more likely finish out within this desirable weight range that we're looking for. Okay? And give us that 0.45 of a square inch or 0.45 of an inch maximum back fat that we desire. If we look up here in the upper end, these cattle are a late maturing, large frame cattle, and we find that a lot of these will finish out at too heavy a weight. Okay? They'll be over this 1,350 pound live weight when we finish them out. They also will have a lower percentage of fat to bone to lean. Now you might say, well, that's good. You know, we're getting rid of a lot of the waste fat. True, you are, but guess what? On a lot of these cattle, you're also getting rid of a lot of the marbling. Okay, they don't marble very well. And for that reason, they don't grade very well. Now, can we find cattle in all of these frame scores that'll work? You betcha. We sure can. There's genetics in all frame scores that'll do the job, but it just gets a little harder when you get down here on this end and get up here on this end. Okay? Now, if we look at muscle thickness in our cattle, we've got USDA muscling scores of 1, 2, and 3. 1s are thick muscled animals. 2s would be average muscled cattle, and 3s are thin or light muscled cattle. All right. Now we want to eliminate these USDA number 3s. Okay. These thin muscled cattle are not going to cut out ribeyes that are going to be big enough to meet our window of acceptability, and we're going to talk about what that is here in just a little bit. These average muscle cattle will come much more close to fitting the window of acceptability that we need in terms of ribeye area. So these are the type of cattle that we really want to target, along with up to about the mid-range of these heavy muscled cattle. They'll fit. However, just like we want to avoid the extremes in these light muscled cattle, we also want to avoid the extremes in these heavy muscled cattle. If we get animals that are too heavily muscled, then you can have a whole world of problems, okay? Particularly if you get into the double muscled genetics in these cattle. You'll not only have problems with those cattle grading and finishing out like they should, but you'll have fertility problems, milking problems, structural problems, you name it, you got it, okay? So avoid extremes, all right? Now, if we look at what we want to see in our harvested cattle or in that carcass, we'd like to see a carcass weight between 600 and 900 pounds, okay? That's the sides of beef hanging up in the cooler. That's what we want to see. We want them to weigh between 600 and 900 pounds. We want a ribeye area between 12.5 and 14 square inches. Now let me tell you though, this is the ideal. This is what we really would like to see, but it's mighty hard to get enough cattle in our industry that fit this window. So we've widened it out a little bit, and we really do accept cattle pretty readily that have ribeyes between 11 and 16 square inches, okay? But we don't want to see animals with under 11, and we don't want to see animals above 16. If you think about it this way, when you go to a restaurant and you order a 10-ounce ribeye, for proper cooking of that steak and proper degree of doneness, it needs to be about 1 inch thick, okay? Now, if that animal is too light muscled and that ribeye area is below 11, you're going to have to cut it too thick, okay, to get a 10-ounce ribeye. And if that animal is too heavily muscled, you're going to have to cut it too thin to get a 10-ounce standard ribeye. And if you're the person in there cooking 200 or 400 or 500 steaks every night, and you've got them all different thicknesses, you're going to have a world of problems trying to get them all cooked right. Okay, so you want them all the same degree of doneness. Again, maximum back fat of no more than 45/100ths of an inch, a USDA yield grade of 2.5 or less, and a USDA quality grade of at least Select Plus. Okay, let's talk about what makes up yield grade and quality grade. If we look at the carcass hanging here, this was molded off of an actual side of beef, okay? And the hot carcass weight on this animal was 750 pounds. So does he meet our window of acceptability there? Yes, sir. All right, he certainly does. Now, in looking at yield grade, there are 4 factors that help us to determine yield grade. And those 4 factors are back fat thickness, ribeye area, percent kidney, pelvic, and heart fat, and the hot carcass weight, okay? Now, yield grade ranges from 1 to 5, and it is defined as the percentage of boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts that we get from a carcass. A yield grade 1 would be the leanest animal, meaning he'd have the highest yield of red meat, okay? And a 5 would be the fattest, meaning he would have the lowest yield of red meat and a lot more fat in the type of fat that's throwaway, that back fat and that KPH fat, okay? The 4s and 5s, yield grade 4s and 5s are highly undesirable. If you sell your animals on a grid, then what you're going to find is you're going to get a pretty stiff discount for these yield grade 4s and 5s. Anywhere from a $15 up to a $25 per hundredweight discount, okay? And you can't stand that, folks. That'll kill you. Your profitability has just gone out the window. All right, now, if we look at 2 of the factors that help us to determine yield grade, I said one of them was ribeye area, and this is the ribeye area right here that we're looking at, okay? And the second one is back fat thickness. And we measure back fat thickness 2/3 of the length down this ribeye. Now, this animal, we've already said that his 750-pound hot carcass weight fits our window of acceptability. He had a 12.5 square inch ribeye. Does that fit? You betcha. Okay? He had 4/10 of an inch back fat. Does that fit? You bet. Okay? So far, he's doing pretty good, isn't he? All right, now let's look at quality grade, and let's see if he matches up in quality grade. Now, USDA quality grade goes from standard to select to choice to prime, with, of course, prime being the most desirable and the highest grade that we have for our cattle. The two factors that help us to determine quality grade, or the two primary factors, are marbling and the degree of maturity. Okay? So let's look at marbling in this animal. Marbling is intramuscular fat, or the flakes of fat that you see inside this muscle. This is the only kind of fat that we desire, okay, in our animals. We'd like to genetically get rid of all this other fat, but keep this marbling. Because what did I tell you at the beginning? This marbling, above and beyond anything, helps us to determine consumer preference, okay, consumer acceptability of our product. Okay? Now, where would this animal have graded according to his marbling? Anybody have an idea? Choice? Choice? Okay. Absolutely right. Okay. He'd have been about average choice. Okay. About average choice. So this was a very good animal. Okay. That means he would have graded in the upper 2/3 of choice. He had about 4/10 of an inch back fat. I think we've already said that. And in terms of maturity, how would we determine that? Any idea? How do we determine maturity in these animals?
Is that done on the spines up there?
Yes, sir. It sure is. You know, when a grader, a USDA grader, goes into a cooler, he's never seen these animals live, and he doesn't have birth records and all of this on them, okay? So he's got to go in here and determine how old they were just by looking at the carcass. And you can do that by looking at the degree of cartilage at the tips of the spinous processes, or what we call feather bones. You look at the degree of fusion of the vertebrae back here in the sacral region, and you look at the shape, color, and width of those ribs, okay? All of those factors help us to determine maturity. Now, to grade choice, to qualify for the USDA choice or prime, they must be what we call A maturity animals, okay? And to be an A maturity, that means they must be between 9 and 30 months of age, okay? Between 9 and 30 months of age to grade choice or prime. All right, and this animal certainly went within that range. It was about 18 months of age when it was slaughtered. Okay, let's look at some of our steaks up here. Now, we've already talked about this one. We said this animal graded in the upper 2/3 of choice and pretty much fit every window of acceptability that we can define. What about this one? What do you think about that steak? How would that animal have performed? Okay, he's got enough marbling to grade low choice. All right, he's got less than 4/500ths of an inch back fat. He's got about 12 square inches ribeye area, between 11.5 and 12. So he fits, doesn't he? He fits. What about this animal? What do we see on this steak? Okay, this is the ribeye area here, okay? These muscles that you see, the multifidus and spinalis and all of this, those muscles do not make up part of the ribeye area, or that ribeye muscle that we actually measure, okay? So we're only looking at this. What about muscle area? Does he have enough muscle to him? No, okay? You can cheat, you can read the signs below too, but no, he doesn't, okay? He was a little light muscled, a little below 11, a little too much back fat, not enough marbling, okay? Not enough marbling. All right, what about this animal? Okay, that should stand out. Not enough marbling, okay? He grades standard. You know what the discount is on a grid for standard? About $20 to $22 per hundredweight, okay? On some grids, a little higher than that. All right, also, this is the ribeye area. What do you say about that? Too big, okay? He has too much muscling. More than likely, this animal won't grade. He's got too much muscle. He probably came out of this end up here and this end up here, okay? What about this one? Okay, too much fat, right? He's going to have too high yield grade, folks. Okay, he's going to yield grade over a 4. However, will he grade? Oh, yes, sir. Look at the marbling in that animal. Now, as far as eating quality, guess what? He's going to eat pretty good, and I wouldn't mind eating a steak like this, but the average consumer doesn't want to see this rind on it, okay? And again, if we feed them out to that, we have to throw it away. You know, that's waste. What about this last one down here? What do y'all say about this one? Okay, too much back fat. Somebody said too small and not enough marbling. Everything is wrong with this one, okay? He just was no good. And more than likely, this animal came from down in here somewhere and down in here, okay? Okay, that's our whistle to rotate stations. I appreciate it, and we hope you all enjoy the rest of the program tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, we're glad that you all are here tonight, and if you'll look at your trifold menu there, you can see that on the front page, everything that's on that sheet is reflected up here on this display. What the objective of this station is to talk about those management practices that prevent us from getting the full value of our animal at the end of the production cycle. Again, in the 1991 audit, there were several things that were found that we can do on the farm or through the production chain that results in us getting the full value of those animals, and some of them are listed here up on the board. First of all, we want to talk about injection sites and bruising damage. What the 1991 audit found was that over $200 million annually was lost due to injection sites and bruising damage. And I won't ask you all to raise your hands, but think about this just for a minute. How many of you have caught up an animal in the chute, caught up a cow in the chute, and reached up there and injected in this top butt? If we were to show hands, we'd probably all have to raise our hands and say, yeah, I've done that. But what we have to ask ourselves, have we really considered the value of the muscle or the meat that we're injecting into at that point? This is a sirloin, and what's the value of a sirloin today? Probably somewhere between $8 and $10 a pound in the local market and the local retail market. What are we doing when we inject it into that area? Well, this is an example of that. This piece of meat was found by a beef extension agent in Arkansas. Now, I'm really glad that beef extension agent was the one that found it. The reason is that if somebody outside the beef industry had found that and they had the option of ordering either chicken or pork, you know that the next time that they were to order something in a fine restaurant, it's not going to be beef. So in order for us to have a good eating experience for all our customers, we've got to make sure that we understand what's happening. And what is happening is that each time we inject into that cut of meat, first of all, the needle causes damage to the muscle, and secondly, the material that we're injecting in there also causes damage, and it has to heal. It heals with these type of scars. Now, this particular one is a fatty scar, but it also can be very gristly and be very tough. So, we've got to keep in mind what we're doing when we inject into the muscle. First of all, we're injecting into the sirloin, as we can see here. Now, what's going on inside the animal? Let's take a look. When we inject into that lesion, okay, when we inject into that lesion, we're causing damage to the muscle. Damage to the muscle, and it's healing with a scar or abscessing. And of course, we've already identified that this cut of meat is worth about $10 a pound. And when that animal heals with this type of a scar in this lesion, then that all has to be trimmed out and thrown away. So we've lost that at a rate of $10 a pound. What's more, we found that the area around that lesion also has an inflammatory process going on. We get a significant amount of infiltrate in that area, okay? So we get increased toughness. We found that up to 4 inches away from the center of that lesion that we can get a increased toughness and of course a decreased eating experience when this type of lesion occurs. And so not only do we lose the value of the center of the lesion, we also lose a substantial part of the muscle around it, and we do that because this particular cut of meat, instead of being worth $10 a pound, is now devalued to $1 a pound. So substantial economic losses 2 ways when we inject into the muscle. What we're suggesting that people do then is to move away from the top butt as an injection site and move that into the neck. Now this is strictly an economic decision because the muscle is the same in both places, and what we're doing is we're injecting into a muscle that's not worth $10 a pound, but rather is worth 99 cents a pound, okay? And if we do have to trim in that area, it's not so substantial. So we're recommending that if people have the option of using intramuscular or subcutaneous injection, that they choose subcutaneous injection to keep that injection site as shallow as possible. We are recommending that if a subcutaneous injection is used, that you use a tenting technique. And essentially what that involves is to pinch up the hide, lift it up, and then of course inject underneath the thumb. That places the material between the skin and the muscle tissue itself. If the medication offers you the alternative of subcutaneous or underneath the skin versus an intramuscular injection, we're recommending the subcutaneous route. If the medication requires that it go intramuscular, we're recommending that it be injected at the same site, but it go in perpendicular. So you got to ask yourself, what are the landmarks for these type of injections in the neck? Those landmarks are, first of all, below the nape of the neck, okay, in front of the shoulder, and above the spinal column or above the jugular furrow. And if we map that out, that makes a really nice triangle up in that area, and we have a substantial area, a substantial target area that we can place our injections. If more than one injection needs to be placed in this area, we recommend that at least be 1 hand's breadth apart, okay? So that's our target area, and if on the occasion that we were to get a knot such as this knot here, you can see that lesion. If that does occur, then that can be pulled with the hide. This is going to be pulled off with the hide, leaving less damage to the deep muscle tissues itself. We affectionately call that the knot of quality. And the reason why we do that, if we see those type of things, we know that that animal has been vaccinated. So don't let your cattle buyers devalue those animals because they have a knot or two. This also brings up another reason that we want to keep records, that we want to keep a map of the injection sites that we're using, because there's 2 reasons that these can happen. First of all, some products are more likely to cause injection sites or blemishes such as this. Another thing can be our technique. So by using developing a good record system, by mapping out where we place injections, we can go back to our records and find a pattern and identify whether it's our technique or the product causing these injection site lesions. Okay? Another area of substantial loss in the is identified by the by the beef quality audit was bruising damage. As you can see down here in the lower left-hand side, that this picture is a picture of a carcass hanging that has substantial bruising right in front of the hook bones. Each one of those lesions results in these type of losses or trim outs, which can be weighed in terms of about 17 pounds per animal. So you can do the math. You can see that a 17-pound loss is going to result in a substantial loss to the animals. What we're recommending that people do is do a self-audit of your premises. How many of you have these type of things on your place? Now, what is this? This, of course, is bolts or nails in posts. How many of you have pieces of tin that are sticking out, boards that need nailed back together? Ever see several heads being shaken around the group? So it's important that you look through your place and make sure that these things aren't occurring, that you have loose tin, loose boards, go ahead and nail them back down before you process your animals. Now this applies to both the adults as well as the young stock. Now we worry sometimes that, we think sometimes that with our young stock, if they're damaged today, it's not going to be a factor later on. But what we found that these scars that we saw in the injection site lesions or these bruising type scars will last, we know, at least 18 months. So the things we do today will have an effect on the eating quality of our customer further down the line. Now when it comes to the cow, it's even more important because a cow that is processed today could be taken to the sale barn tomorrow and be in the slaughter plant the following day. So as short as 48 hours, that animal may be in the food chain. So it's extremely important as we go to sell our adult animals to make sure that we are not causing these kind of damages anywhere along the process. Another area of substantial loss, according to the beef quality audit, was losses due to hide damage. Now there's several ways that hides can be damaged. First of all, if you look closely, there's a big T bar C right here. Now this is called a Colorado or New Mexico rib brand. This is done out west primarily so that they can identify their animals at long distances. But what we've got to keep in mind is that our customers don't necessarily want somebody else's initials on the front seat of their Lexus or their Cadillac. We can understand that. So essentially what happens is that this whole hide, half of the value of this hide is lost because of this type of rib brand. We know that these rib brands, or that these hides, are worth somewhere between $75 and $150 when they're pulled from the animal. And so you can see if you have to trim at least half of it away and throw it out, we have substantial losses along the line. We also have damage to losses, hide loss damage, that are due to external parasites. Right here we can see some losses due to the grub worm. Now the grub worm is essentially the immature stage or the larval stage of the heel fly. These immature stages penetrate the skin, migrate through the body, and in about 11 months they penetrate through the skin on the back and they emerge as flies and they complete their life cycle. But what happens to the hide? When the hide is damaged, it still has to heal. And when it heals with these little pox lesions, and of course that devalues this hide in particular. The same can be said for these lesions over here that are associated with the lice. Now lice don't directly cause such severe lesions, but we know that these lice cause a tremendous amount of irritation. And essentially what happens at that point, the old cow's trying to get the lice off, and so she's scratching on a locust tree or a loose piece of tin or a sharp nail or something of that nature, and she's scratching the hide itself, and it still has to heal. And when it does, it's going to heal with this type of scar. Finally, this in the middle is a picture of, or not a picture, but an example of ringworm lesions, which is a fungal infection. And it's important that you talk to your veterinarian to make sure that you control that, because it is causing some scarring and damage to the lesion itself. I'm going to go back to our bruising example over here and talk just a little bit about the way you handle your animals. It's important that as we're handling our animals that we get away from using sticks like you've seen me hold here tonight. It's important that, in fact, how many of you, again, I won't ask you to raise your hands, how many of you have had a cow in the pen or in the crowding alley and you reached up with a post or a stick or something of this nature and you caught her right between the eyes? Or worse yet, you've laid a stick like this up across her back. Have you thought about what you're doing when that happens? Well, if somebody were to hit you, a person with a stick like that, of course you'd bruise. An animal is going to bruise the same way. But what we have here is an economic loss, because now we're bruising our sirloin or even our ribeye area. What's going to happen at that point when we bruise those ribeyes, do you recognize this cut of meat? That's a T-bone steak, right? When we bruise that area, that all has to be trimmed out. That's inedible. That's inedible. So it's important that we keep in mind that we are causing damage to meat when we are mishandling our animals, and we should get away from the use of sticks, hot shots, clubs. As you saw in some of the other stations, it's important for us to slow down and use patience as we're moving our animals to minimize these type of bruising damages. Finally, the beef quality audit identified substantial losses due to sick animals. We know now that if an animal gets sick anywhere along the production cycle, from that point on, they're not going to grow as fast, they're not going to grow as efficiently, and likewise, they're not going to put down fat as fast as their counterparts would. So therefore, those animals will not marble as well. So it's important that we develop a good vaccination program so that those animals never get sick if they don't have to. A good vaccination program should include minimally a clostridial vaccine such as blackleg. It should include IBR, PI3, BVD, and those things should be given pre-weaning. Likewise, our surgery should be done before weaning. We do recommend that animals be castrated with a knife technique and that they be healed at the time of weaning. What happens when an animal is weaned and surgery is conducted at the same time, their hormones basically get out of balance, their cortisol gets very high, and they're not capable of responding with a good immune response, even though we may vaccinate at that time. So it's important that we do the surgery early on so that they can be under the care of their mother, and the mother can nurse them back to health, and they'll not have the stress on their system, and they can respond to vaccines much more effectively if they're given at an early age. Same thing could apply for the surgery associated with dehorning. We know that if we use an instrument simply such as this scoop, that there's far less damage to the animal when we dehorn them early on than if we wait and we have to use an instrument such as this Barnes dehorner at weaning. Now then we're going to have a lot more bleeding. We're going to maybe get into the sinus cavities of the skull, maybe end up in sinus infections, and ultimately result in more stress. So the recommendation here is that we vaccinate early, and we make sure that we do our surgeries early, certainly prior to weaning. Finally, we recommend that people read and follow the label directions. This is going to be more important in the future as increased laws go into effect that make sure that products are used on label, not used in food animals off label. It's important that the proper dose is used. It's important that proper records are kept, because these records need to accompany an animal when they're sold and ownership is transferred from one person to the next, particularly because of residues. Most of these products have a period of time after they're injected until the product is cleared from the system, and so it's important that we keep a record of that injection, and that we certainly follow the label directions and make sure those animals are not slaughtered until the product is cleared from the system. Ultimately, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for an animal that is very high quality, that is very uniform in their appearance, that's free of blemishes, that's free of defects, that's identified, that satisfies two major customers. First of all, our immediate customer, that being the stocker or the feedlot operator. And finally, and probably most importantly, we want to satisfy the needs of our ultimate customer. And that is the person that's buying our beef products in the restaurants and supermarkets across the United States. When we do that, then we can get the full value of our products at each stage of the production cycle.
I'm the area livestock agent with Extension Service in Northeast Mississippi. Obviously, my stop is to discuss with you responsible culling, and we're going to talk about some things that you already know about, but I want to point it out to you and perhaps trigger some thoughts in your mind that may help you make some decisions in the future. As you see, the responsible culling involves eyes, mouths, feet and legs, udders, body condition. Here's disposition, and then we end up, hopefully in the fall of the year, in most cases, preg checking to make the final decisions. If you start over here with me, I'd like to kind of put you in a frame of mind. I'd like to put you in a frame of mind that think of your cattle operation, think of your cows as your employees, okay? And if you'll think of them in those terms, perhaps we can, as I go through it, it'll make some sense to you as to what I'm trying to relate across to you. But you've got to have productive animals. You've got to have animals that work for you, and there's really no excuses out there. It's just like an employee. They've got to be productive every day to make you money, or you really don't need them. So if you start, when you look at responsible culling, a good place to start is with the eyes. Oftentimes we don't pay close enough attention to the eyes. Lots of times we'll just look at them real quickly when they go through the chute, and if we don't see any drainage or something, we won't even really take a close observation there. This big long word here, ocular neoplasia, is a word that we commonly know as cancer eye. And a lot of times we won't notice this little tiny growth here in the edge of the eye, and that's really the first signs of what's happening when this cancer starts. And after a couple of months, it'll progress to more like of a wart-type growth. And we can most likely do have our veterinarian to do some surgical work and perhaps clear that eye up for a while and get another couple of years out of the animal. But a lot of times when we really get concerned, it's already reached this stage right here. You already have some serious infections, some drainage, and in this lower eyelid, and then that's when it's probably gotten to the point where it's gone too far, and you should have, if you're going to cull, you need to be looking right here and thinking about culling right there and not let it get to this point. Because a lot of times, if you look at an eye like this, you'll say, well, maybe I can get one more calf out of her. And then this is what we often see come through the stockyards, and that's when we've waited, obviously, way too long. Your sale barn operator is only doing you a favor when he buys a cow like that. There's nobody that can gain from this animal. And a lot of times, that whole carcass will have to be condemned when it gets to that point. Another real important place in culling is obviously in the mouth. You want to take the time to pull that lower lip down and look. Obviously, this is an example of a 2-year-old heifer, and this is exactly what that 2-year-old heifer looks like. It's the reason when you have her out there and she's losing a little weight, she's got that baby calf on her, she's lost 25% of her ability to harvest forage because she just literally can't pull it apart there. What you want to, you hope that you look at your mature cows and you see a good set of teeth that are still intact, that's not broke, that are still sound and solid. And then as they get a little age on them, these older cows, they'll still have a good set of teeth, they'll still be good and solid, no necking or anything like that. As the cows get on older and depending on the pasture types and the conditions that you're putting them in, if you'll really look close, you'll begin to see them neck. And I mean by the gaps coming in these teeth right here. They're beginning to neck out and spread out a little bit. And that tells you that, I need to just make some notes on her production record, because in a year, maybe 2, you'll start seeing this in those animals. This is what they call the broke mouth. And once you get to this point, these are the animals that are not going to be looking as well. Their body condition score may not be as what the others in the herd is. And the reason is she simply she can't spend but 24 hours a day in the pasture like the rest of them, but she's not going to be able to harvest as much as the rest of them because there's a difference in this and this, okay? So obviously if you're going to cull, you need to look at the teeth and get rid of them when they're starting to get broke mouth, and it can be from age, it can be from the conditions they're having to graze under. And certainly it's way too late after they become smooth mouth to, you should have already culled them by then, because they're going to be those that go down on you in the wintertime and just going to be hard to get through the winter. Let's move along a little bit. And these employees of yours now, you're doing your annual evaluation on them. So when you find these things, that's a mark against them. One of the things we need to look for, and some of it is our fault, some of it is the results of conditions there on the farm, and then some of it is genetics that we need to realize and know the differences in. You get things that happen on the farm, you get cattle that get bruises and abscesses, and you need to be aware of that, and you need to address that. You don't need to let it go and persist, because a lot of times if you let it go, you'll have cattle that get down, and then when you finally say, well, I'll try to carry on to the sale barn, maybe I can get something for her. Again, as soon as you pull her off the truck, that's when CNN is going to be there, and that's when we get a black eye in the cattle business. When they see that chain around her leg, and then we're going to be trying to explain our way out of that. You know, we're doing things humanely, and we don't want that. We want our cattle, our image of our cattle to be, as cattlemen, to be good to the public's eye, because this, after all, we're not cattlemen, we're beef producers. And that's what you need to think about as being a beef producer. Look at these things that are happening in your herd. You know, hock and abscesses are things that can happen very commonly. And a lot of times, it's our fault because we didn't fix something in the pasture or in the corral, and she got an injury, but for some reason she got it and it's not getting well. Well, before it gets to a real stage of just terrible infection, we need to get rid of her, go on and move her out of the way. If you'll notice down here, this is what they call screw claw. And screw claw is something that if you'll look at your cattle, you'll see occasionally in your herd. And it's not anything that you did, it's a genetic defect. But what you can do about it is you can trace this animal back to the cow, to the bull, or to her grandmother or whatever, and you need to know that all you need to know about that is I don't need to keep that animal, because it's going to show up again and again and again in her progeny. And obviously, when you're inspecting these cattle and doing some culling, you want a nice round there with no abscesses, good feet and legs, and their hooves are in good shape. Another area that I think that we sometimes need to pay more attention to than we do, we've all got cattle that we've let go and go and go because maybe they've got an udder problem that's called a pendulous udder. And that's simply the big teated cows that we say, oh, she has a good calf, but I'm going to keep her one more year and just put up with it. This is not anything that we need to keep breeding year after year. She's going to pass this on to any heifers you keep, so it's better off for you to get rid of her now and not reproduce it in the herd. If you've ever had mastitis in your herd, you know that that's a serious problem. Dairymen, of course, know a lot about mastitis. They've had more experience with it than beef producers. But one of the first physical signs of mastitis is what they'll call the lumpy, bumpy udders. And it's just an abscess, so to speak. This actually was a cross-section taken of this udder. And you see the abscess pockets right in here where those udders has got all these pockets where the mammary tissue is just destroyed, and it's going to obviously lower her milk production. It's going to lower the weight of the calf that she can wean, and that's something that we need to go ahead and move that cow before she gets totally mastitic. And this is what we're actually looking for in our annual inspection. We want nice teated animals that's well spaced. They hang straight down. They're small where the calf can get their mouth on them well, and this udder is good and level, and that's just a good productive animal. Looking at body condition, you know, now in the industry talks about body conditions in terms of a numerical value, and they're talking about these poor doers. When you bring them into the stockyard to try to get them off your hands and get the sale barn guy to give you what he'll give you for them. Nobody in the food chain really can do a whole lot for that animal. That skin and bones, there's really not any meat, muscle under that hide there, and we don't need to let them get in this 1, 2, and 3 body condition score. On the other end of the spectrum, these body condition score 8 and 9s, that's what they're extremely fat, they're obese, they're obviously carrying more fat covering than the industry wants, and if you're culling those cows, you know, they're gonna have a lot of fat trim there, and you don't want that. And if you got a lot of cattle in your herd like that, I'd say that you probably are experiencing some reproduction problems as well. These cattle that are in the frame score 5, body condition score 5 to 6, are that's where we want to be. That's where we want to be in terms of acceptable marketing condition, because those animals fit the market better on the the killer cow markets and things. And not only from a meat production standpoint, this is the body condition score you want your cattle in when they are carrying calves, and to get them to rebreed, they need to be in at least a body condition score 5, and they need to be in at least a body condition score 5 after breeding, and then on as they go into the first, second, third trimester of pregnancy. But body condition score is something that's, we all like to go out there and say, oh, our cattle, boy, my cows are fat, and you might not be getting what you want. Fat cattle don't milk as well, and a lot of times fat cattle, their calves that they're carrying are smaller at birth, so it's a lot of problems associated with that. Here's an area here, disposition, that I think we all need to, again, our employees out there, how many of you want to go to the pasture and have to hide behind a tree just to count heads? You're supposed to be 25 out here, but you're looking for that one that's going to run you down. Disposition is a problem as far as I'm concerned in the cattle industry. We don't need disposition, obviously, for our own safety, but then we get into some meat and food-related issues. A lot of times, one of the things that contributes to the dark cutters, and the industry has no place to go with those dark cutters, but disposition contributes to the dark cutters. And the dark cutters are those that have stress-related, or they have a sickness, or they've been held off feed and water for a long period of time, and then just plain mean. They just don't have a good disposition, and all those things contribute to dark cutters. But this is really what you want, a real rosy pink product. And after animals are hauled and processed, they still should have the ability and the chemical processes in their body to make this meat bloom. That's the term they use, make it bloom to be that rosy pink color. Old John here, that's kind of a little cartoon that stuck up there, but you shouldn't have to put on your body armor just to work your cattle. And the point here is this is about culling, and culling certainly involves disposition. And I would encourage you to really think a whole lot about, my cattle, and having to work them, having to get them up, and those kind of things, because we have a lot of cattle in Mississippi that I think would obviously fit into poor disposition types. One of the final things we need to look at is preg checking, and that's just another management tool that I think we all need to be doing. If you're on spring breeding, obviously you need to be preg checking in the fall, or vice versa. If you're fall breeding, you need to preg check as soon as you can in the spring or late winter. But our ultimate goal is to look at all of these things that we've talked about, and I hope you have a good working relationship with a veterinarian, because our veterinarians can give you advice on every phase of what we've talked about in culling. And then when it comes time to bring him out and make that last evaluation, maybe she's getting some short teeth, and then the vet comes out and you're already thinking, well, maybe I can get one more calf out of her. And then, you know, if he tells you she's open, well, then he's made your decision a lot better. But those preg checks, $2 or $3 an animal, and it's well worth it because you all know what it costs to take an animal through the winter, and that's obviously our biggest cost in the cow business is feeds and winter feed costs. So do your preg checking, and then our ultimate goal is to end up with an efficient herd, not just a cow, but an efficient herd that is in good body condition, has a really good calf by her side. She's got a really good calf within her, and she's got all the things that we've already looked at. She's got a good mouth, her eyes are clear, she's got a good udder, she's in the right body condition, she's an easy keeper, and she's got the right disposition. Well, I heard the whistle, but I'd like to take any questions or give you an opportunity to make some comments if you'd like. One of the things that we've got 2 minutes, and I'm gonna, disposition also can be man-made. This is just a fiberglass poking stick, and we are talking about industry issues, and we're talking about news reports, and our product is on the line every day when somebody goes to the grocery store and buys beef. You know, there was an incident not long ago that they found fiberglass in a carcass, and that fiberglass had to come from this poking rod, from a poking rod that's just similar to this. It was little flakes of it, so we need to be careful how we use our things. Disposition can be caused by this. This is unnecessary lots and lots of the times. It may be necessary for you in your mind to make your life easier, but stop and think a minute. You know, every time I bring these cattle to this chute, they're going to remember this, and then they're going to be banging the sides of the wall. They're going to be getting all upset and stirred up. And so use these hot shots very sparingly. And if you have any doubts about just how much trauma a hot shot will put on a cow, I suggest you stick yourself with it and see what it does to you. It'll get your attention, and it really puts a volt of electricity in you. All of you seen and heard these these little gizmos. A lot of times cattle can be moved quietly and easily, and you don't have to have all the dogs in the community and 2 or 3 cowboys. Sometimes you'll just take a sack of feed and take something like this instrument here that makes a little noise, then it'll work fine, and in most cases you won't get your cattle as stirred up.